Hey, welcome back. This is going off of the previous episode about cogs in the machine and industrial to technological and all that stuff. So one of the things that I didn't mention, and by the way, I recommend listening to that episode first. One of the things that I didn't really get into is how education was built for the industrial paradigm and kind of uh, giving people a highly specific role rather than creating a well-rounded human. So if you think about the traditional view of what like a university education was, it was basically to create somebody who is capable of critical thought and uh, liberal arts education. The idea of creating a more well-rounded person if that person had happened to have the resources available to them that would allow them to kind of spend time sort of just uh, learning about stuff rather than being a part of the industrial society. So I believe the idea of public education really came into its own in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century, and it effectively copied the Prussian model. And that was to create a standardized student, a standardized curriculum, rather than allowing students to be curious and to pursue what they actually enjoyed or might be good at. It was to give a standard curriculum to create conformist students that would basically follow narrow channels of career prospects. And that is the educational system that we have had ever since. And if you actually think about why our education system is the way it is to create identical thinking people, effectively automatons, and to funnel them out into a select number of professions in the broader society. The good thing is the number of opportunities for making income and exploring your interests and learning, it has just exploded. The bad news is the institution of education that exists right now, both lower education, or I should say public education, public schooling, um, to an extent private schooling as well, but also university education, is basically like in those old Wile E. Coyote cartoons where he runs over the edge of the cliff and he's just running on thin air. That's what those are doing right now. What these institutions are doing is they're just going on thin air. The reason why they were created the way that they were is no longer relevant. It's collapsing beneath them, but they don't even realize that they're literally zombie institutions. And that's why I was so compelled by the Andrew Yang conversation with Professor Scott Galloway, where they were asking, are colleges and universities the next ghost malls? I actually believe that they are. I think that unfortunately, a lot of the colleges and universities just don't realize it, but the state of education is profoundly changing. Like the writing is on the wall, and nobody has put the no Martin Luther has come and put the 95 theses on the university doors, like he put his criticisms of the Catholic Church on the cathedral doors. Um, but basically, that's what the universities are. They're a racket at this point. They are doing the equivalent of what the Catholic Church did in selling indulgences, which were access to heaven. They're basically selling. The universities are selling these diminished value degrees that are theoretically access to, I don't know, a career or all of your desires or the American dream or whatever nonsense it's pitched as. And people sink in their $60,000 a year, go into debt, which is basically like strapping an anchor to your neck and jumping into the Mystic River. So, you know, I'm hoping that that people start to come to the realization that our entire all of our institutions are built on the industrial paradigm, which is falling away and or gone. So not only that idea of what education is versus what it ought to be in bringing the fullness and richness of human experience to the student and preparing them for a lifetime of learning and pursuing meaning and purpose and collaboration and creativity and empathy and all of these different things, generating a sense of self generating a sense of community, all these different things, that would make strong citizens. But another thing that I mentioned in the previous podcast that I didn't really go into was Edward Bernays, and this is the guy who's basically the father of Madison Avenue and advertising and consumer culture and materialism and the basic economic engine of the United States after World War II, aside from the military industrial complex. And his view, by the way, this guy was Freud's nephew. So he basically took Freud's idea of public psychology and group psychology. And his idea was if you can create docile citizens, um, rather than engaged citizens, if you can create passive consumers out of people, then you're not going to have a problem like a revolution, or you're not going to have something like what happened in Nazi Germany or in the Soviet Union. You're not going to have anything like that. You can have just a population of people that you can kind of push around like a herd of cattle or sheep, and they're just going to basically um, not really understand much and think that they have two options in life, their Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and we'll keep those options. What each of those two parties is offering, we'll keep it narrow, and we don't want anybody really kind of doing anything too unpredictable. So we'll just keep everything kind of nice. And so there was propaganda and advertising that was designed around that, and all the job structure and pretty much everything in the industrial economy was based off of creating um, people with material property that wasn't previously available. You think about the PTSD that came out of the previous generation that lived through the Depression and through World War II. They It was a source of pride coming out of that you could own a house in a suburb, or that, in that you had an actual job that would provide for you, and so you were loyal to the job was loyal to you. You had pensions, stick with them for decades and decades, you get the gold watch, you climb the company ladder, all these things. But you think about how thoroughly materialism and consumerism has been integrated into our culture. It has basically hijacked people's brains and made them deeply insecure about themselves, and said, okay, now that that insecurity is there, this is what you need to make that insecurity go away. But it's only a fleeting pleasure. It's not really happiness. It's basically eliminating the idea of happiness, which generally comes from strong connections and relationships with people and sense of community and a vocation with some kind of meaning, and contributing belief in something bigger than yourself. All those things generally lead to human happiness, but that was all pushed to the wayside when it came to like, oh, we can just get society to keep chugging along if we get people to just, instead of pursuing happiness, like what's enshrined in the Constitution, basically get them to adopt an endless pursuit of pleasure. Um, so we're having that realization. I don't know if we're fully articulating it yet, but that kind of gross idea of people as just this mindless mass that you manipulate with propaganda, or you manipulate with outrage, or that you manipulate with demagoguery, or that you manipulate with social media platforms, like that has got to go. It's uh, this technocratic view of people as just an entity that you can control just like any other. They're just ones and zeros, or they're gears in a system. That's not, humans are, they have inherent dignity and value, and that's the core of what humanism is supposed to be about. uh, I feel like we don't really know what liberalism is today, because we just think like, oh, liberal is somebody who gets super upset and protests, and who believes in abortion and believes in gay right. Like that's like a modern narrow definition of what a liberal is. But the narrative that we've been following in theory for a century, or since the Enlightenment really, has been liberal humanism, which is like allowing every individual, regardless of what their circumstances is, what their circumstances are, to pursue what makes them happy, and to make it possible for them to actualize and have a sense of purpose in the world. But we've lost sight of, we sort of need to transform. We need to come to terms with it and remember what liberal humanism is, but we also need to transform it into technological humanism as we become more symbiotic with technology. Um, so yeah, there is a lot here. Uh, we just need to get away from the manipulative idea that a couple people should be regarding the general mass of humans with contempt, and like they should just be manipulated, rather than like different people have different things to give. And it's a human being isn't just defined by their economic output, because that's sort of the way that we value humans today. And this is one of the reasons why I loved Andrew Yang's message, is because he's saying like, no, humans are more than what they contribute to an economy, or more than the paycheck that they take home. They have inherent value, and they have inherent dignity, and they contribute. There's not, yeah, the economy is one way of contributing, but there's also like the caring professions and all these other different jobs which tend to pay less but are like profoundly important for society. There's all of these different ways: artistic expression, people who are thinkers and philosophers. There are all these different things that the economy doesn't seem to care, that we just go, oh, okay, it's just GDP, that's all that matters. It's GDP is the one thing that we should be focusing on. No, GDP is not the one thing that we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on many, many different factors. Um, Andrew Yang's idea was the societal scorecard to get different senses of your society's health, mental health and addiction rates, and, uh, you know, various economic metrics. But just using GDP is like thinking that you can summarize the entire Vietnam War as body counts, which is what they did in the Vietnam War. They tried to sum it up as one single metric, body counts, or thinking that you can reduce the entire complexity of the human mind to one value that we call IQ. It's nonsense. There's no, like, we have this obsession with reduction of complexity to a single metric, or kind of beautiful thing. It's like the obsession with, not everything can be reduced to E equals MC squared. So human beings are complex and multifaceted, and we should treat them as such. That is the ultimate takeaway here. So thank you for listening. And once again, listen to the Cog in the Machine episode before this. But if you got this far, then, um, you know, I guess it won't truly, you'll be able to get the connection between the two of them. So thank you, and talk to you later.